Good evening, everybody. Uneducated economist here. I was just going over this old speech. Let's see here. Dated February 22nd, 2019, the Federal Reserve's review of its monetary policy strategy, tools, and communication practices, given by Vice Chair Richard Clarida. Now, very interesting speech considering the time that it was given. February of 2019. This is before the COVID lockdowns and everything that was taking place from all that. Now, one of the things that the Federal Reserve was experiencing was persistently low inflation coming up until this point. After the lockdown and all the shortages that had taken place, we have supply and demand issues going off the charts, and now we have prices that are ever increasing, the worst inflation we've seen in 40 years. Now, right here, he says, central banks are generally believed to have effective tools for preventing persistent inflation overshoots. But the effective lower bound on interest rates makes persistent undershoots more likely. Persistent inflation shortfalls carry the risk of that longer-term inflation expectations become poorly anchored or become anchored below the stated inflation goal. Now, that is something that we were hearing from the Federal Reserve time and time again. It was like one of the major issues that they were having leading up until the issues that came from the COVID lockdowns. Once the COVID lockdowns took place, all the persistently low inflation was gone. And all we heard was the incredibly high inflation rates that we had after that. Now, if you go and read this speech, they go on to talk about the makeup strategies. They know that the effective lower bound, which is pretty much zero interest rates, where you can no longer drop interest rates to stimulate the economy. Typically, the Federal Reserve would want to drop interest rates around 5%. This dropping of interest rates would get people out there buying houses, cars, going on vacation, having a good time in the economy. This would get people, spending money. This would get the economy moving. Now, listen to this. Because this is where he's talking about, now that we've hit the lower bound, we can't drop interest rates, so we need to go into this make-up strategy to make up for the fact that the inflation has run under 2% for the last 10 years. It goes on to say this. The benefits of make-up strategies rest heavily on households and firms believing in advance that the make-up will, in fact, be delivered when the time comes. For example, that a persistent inflation shortfall will be met with future inflation above 2%. Now, tell me, for how long did we hear leading up to the higher inflation that we are experiencing today that the Federal Reserve said time and time again, that they are going to let inflation run extra hot for extra long for an extended period of time? They said it before it took place. They said it back in 2019, back in February of 2019, before all the COVID lockdowns, that was going to be part of the strategy for getting inflation back up over the 2% back up over 2%, which had been a shortfall for the Federal Reserve, where they weren't able to achieve that 2%. Anyway, it goes on to say, as is well known from the research literature, make-up strategies in general are not time consistent, because when the time comes to push inflation above 2%, conditions at the time will not warrant doing so. How many times are you now hearing people out there saying the Federal Reserve has completely lost control, that they don't know what they're doing? It's because they said that they were going to do that. They said that they were going to be pushing it up during a time that does not seem to warrant doing so. And they say it right there. It goes on to say here, because of this time inconsistency, any make-up strategy to be successful would have to be understood by the public to represent a credible commitment. Now, how many times have we talked about credible threats? As long as the narrative is pushed out there that this is what's happening, guaranteed going to be taking place, no doubt about it, as long as everybody guarantees to know that this is going to take place consistently, all right? So that's what he says there. Would have to be understood by the public to represent a credible commitment. Oops. Sorry, guys. My phone died here. Okay. Now, it goes on to say, that important real-world consideration is often neglected in the academic literature. Nobody's talking about credible threats. They don't talk about the credible threats. They called it jawboning and all kinds of stuff beforehand, but they are not talking about that anymore. Do you notice that the forward guidance doesn't exist? Like, they don't talk about forward guidance anymore? It's because it had to be credible, and in order to be credible, people had to believe it, and they couldn't be saying, hey, we're just telling you this so that you know what's coming. They had to make everybody convinced, or else it wasn't going to work. All right, let's see here. Okay, let's see. That important real-world consideration is often neglected in the academic literature, in which central banks' commitment devices, which he puts in quotes, are simply assumed to exist and be instantly credible on decree. Like, they just believe it. Just believe it, guys. Just believe it. And then the moment that you need to really see it, then it'll come up, and it's kind of like, reminds me of the special purpose vehicles. Like, all of a sudden, bang, right in the middle of this pandemic, and everybody thought that, the Federal Reserve was going to be losing control. All of a sudden, they pop up with the Treasury and these special purpose vehicles, and now they had basically a lending facility to backstop any corner of the financial market after that. It was quite impressive that nobody actually knew about this or saw it coming. Including myself, after these special purpose vehicles popped up, and I'm like, oh, that's how they were able to save all this stuff, man. Otherwise, we would have been in a terrible crisis. Way to go, Fed. I guess you guys are awesome. I'm saying that sarcastically, for those of you who don't remember. Okay. That I'm not truly a shill for the Fed, although a lot of people want to say that. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me continue on here. Let's see here. The commitment devices are simply assumed to exist and are instantly credible by decree. Thus, one of the most challenging questions is whether the Fed could, in practice, attain the benefits of the make-up strategy that are possible in the models. So this is one of the ideas that they had far before COVID kicked in and all the other issues that were taking place. Here, let me turn this light on. Maybe that'll... There we go. Yeah, at least you guys can kind of see me now. All right, so this was part of their strategy. They knew that they were going to be coming into a time where the effective lower bound was no longer going to give them the ability to drop interest rates, but that Ben Bernanke said it way back 20 plus years ago, that there would be plenty of tools that the Federal Reserve could use, and part of those tools were their credible threats. Just the promise that they were going to do something would be enough to get the people out there trying to front run them or react to the Fed's credible threats. That's all there is to it. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave links down in the description or at least a link down in the description for that particular speech. Found it to be pretty interesting and thought I would share it with you guys, since I've been on these credible threats more than just about anybody else has, as the main tool for the Federal Reserve and how they conduct their monetary policy. And most of that is perception. Just trying to get people to believe in a particular direction. And that's where we have to keep an eye on credible threats. Anyway, got a package here. Actually, I picked this package up last week, but I haven't opened it up yet. I kind of forgot to. Not really forgot to. I remembered it was here. I just wanted to make it a point to be sure and come out here and tell you guys about it, because I just didn't want to open it. And before I show you guys what's in the box, be sure and follow me over on Instagram. I'm trying to get that Instagram channel up and moving, and being a little bit more active over on Instagram. And then the podcast as well. So if you know people who would rather listen as opposed to watching videos, go check out the podcast. You can find links to all my stuff at uneducatedeconomist.com. You guys let me know is the name of the podcast. And so anyway, let's see what's in the... here we got The Lord of Easy Money, Christopher Leonard. Right on. Well, thank you very much, whoever sent me the book. I really appreciate it. It was kind of funny because the other day, I don't know what got into me. I'm like, I got to start reading some books. And so I have a dresser that I have been putting the books that people have sent me into. It's like a little end table. And it was in the garage, and after we moved, it was kind of over in the corner of the garage. And I said, I got to open up that end table and get one of those books out of there. And the only one that I could seem to get my hand around and pull out of there was The Wealth of Nations, which is this huge, thick book. And it's just like, are you kidding me? This is like the only one I could seem to get my hands on and get out of there. So anyway, I got The Wealth of Nations out and I started reading it. It's actually, although it's like incredibly like huge, it's like 1,000 pages long or something. It's kind of easy reading, like as far as just kind of getting through it. If you have any interest in like, macroeconomics at all, I think that's probably one of the easier books to, like, as far as what I've read so far, as far as getting into and following. And it's one of these old books that was written like a long time ago, so like 1700s kind of style. So it's really really interesting, some of the stuff that I've read so far, and I'll tell you more about it as I read into it. I'm not a very good reader, so I have a hard time like kind of getting into books and just staying with them. So I've got a few pages into this one, and I'm going to try and do a few more pages tonight and keep with it as much as I can, and hopefully I become more of a consistent reader. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.